There's something about being underestimated that tastes almost sweet. Like standing in the corner of a party, sipping your drink, while everyone around you forgets you're there. They whisper secrets. They drop masks. And you, quiet little, you, see everything. That was me. Holly, the babysitter. Not a real adult, not a real person, not even a threat. Just a warm body who kept the kids from eating glue while the real grown-ups drank wine and played social chess. Let me take you back to where it began, the neighborhood. Oh, that neighborhood. Picture pristine cul-de-sacs. Wine moms in yoga pants who only ever did Pilates once. Dads who drove Teslas they couldn't afford on salaries they pretended were 6 figures. The kind of place where appearances were more important than truth. And secrets? Well, they lived behind every white picket fence. I had just moved back after graduating early from university. Degree in hand. No debt, no drama. Just plans, big ones. But to them, I was still 17-year-old Holly, who used to walk their golden retrievers and wipe grape juice off their kids' faces. It started with the Fergusons. Diana Ferguson, queen bee of the block, sent me a text that read, "Need someone last minute. Jack has the flu. Can you babysit tonight? 6 p.m. I'll pay extra." I stared at the message for a moment. I had just finalized a deal with a startup the week before, one that put a sizable 6-figure deposit into my bank account. I didn't need her money, but I was curious. "Sure," I texted back. "I'll be there." I showed up at 6 sharp in jeans, a plain white tee, and a pair of sneakers that probably cost more than their mortgage payment. Not that they noticed. Diana barely looked up from her wine glass. She handed me a list of rules, tossed me a half-hearted thanks, and flounced off in a cloud of designer perfume and entitlement. Her husband, Greg, gave me the classic, "Hey kiddo" nod. Still couldn't remember I was legally old enough to drink, drive, vote, own property. They left, and I sat with little Jack, who wasn't sick at all. Just hyper. Which, frankly, I respected. He told me his mom said I was just the sitter, and not to let me touch the wine fridge because people like me didn't know real wine from boxed juice. People like me. It wasn't just Diana. It was the entire neighborhood. They still saw me as the girl who rang doorbells for babysitting gigs, who folded laundry while their marriages crumbled quietly upstairs, who knew which kids had night terrors and which ones were sneaking cookies under their pillows. I saw everything, remembered everything, and they saw nothing. 2 nights later, I got another text. Different family. Same tone. Need a sitter. You available? By the 3rd house, it wasn't about money. It was about power. Let them underestimate me. Let them call me the help. I smiled, nodded, showed up, watched their children, ate their snacks, listened. Because the more I watched, the more I realized something delicious. They all had secrets. Diana was cheating with the gym trainer she insisted was just motivating her. Greg was drowning in debt. Their daughter, Lily, was applying to colleges under a fake sports scholarship. The Taylors were worse. Christina Taylor had a flask in her Louis Vuitton bag and a temper she saved for when the cameras were off. Her husband, Alan, was having an all-emotional affair with the school counselor. I say emotional, but I also found a pair of lace underwear in his car. Not Christina's size. They confided in me, or rather in front of me, because to them, I wasn't real. One night, after a particularly long babysitting stint with the Fergusons, I overheard something. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes like a good little helper. Diana was in the living room, chatting with her circle of plastic-perfect friends. "Honestly," she laughed, "Holly is like a pet. You feed her, tell her what to do, and she just exists. Sweet kid, but not going anywhere. She's a babysitter at 24. Can you imagine?" They all laughed. That laugh. I'll never forget it. Not because it hurt, but because it sealed the deal. I was going to destroy them, but slowly, sweetly, like a smile with a knife behind it. Over the next few weeks, I leaned in, hard, volunteered to help more. Showed up early, stayed late, became the trusted household friend. They started asking me for advice, parenting tips, gossip, even investments. That was the best part. They had no idea I'd spent the last 2 years growing a company they thought was just a hobby. No clue I had seats at tech investor tables they couldn't afford tickets to. They were asking me if they should buy into crypto trends or whatever influencer nonsense they were hearing about. I gave them vague advice. Let them stew. And then came the night of the dinner party. Diana was throwing it, of course, the kind of event where everyone wore cocktail dresses and forced smiles, where the wine cost too much and the conversation was too shallow. I got an invitation, not to babysit, to attend, probably as a joke, probably to keep me quiet. But I accepted. And this time, I wasn't arriving on foot. I waited until just the right moment. Just as everyone had gathered on Diana's pristine lawn, the valet was parking the last guest's car. Music was playing. Laughter was echoing. And then I pulled up. The engine purred. Matte black. Italian. Limited edition. The kind of car that didn't just turn heads, it snapped necks. Diana's wine glass froze mid-air. Greg's jaw dropped. Christina dropped her phone. And I stepped out in a dress they couldn't afford wearing, heels that cost more than their monthly HOA dues, with a smile that said everything I didn't need to say. I wasn't just the babysitter anymore. I was the reckoning. But that was only the beginning. Because the real revenge wasn't the car. It was what came after. The silence after I stepped out of the car was rich, heavy, almost indulgent. You could taste the confusion in the air. The way people blinked like they were trying to recalibrate, reframe. They'd built me into a certain shape in their minds. Small, harmless, dependent. And now here I was, walking up the drive like I owned the house they barely paid the mortgage on. Diana's eyes narrowed. The kind of smile she forced on her lips was the same one she gave to women she didn't know but already hated. "Holly," she said, her voice just a little too high. "You look nice." Nice. That word women like her used when they couldn't. Admit you looked better than they expected. I gave her a small smile and stepped in close, just enough for only her to hear. "Thanks. It's Dior. Vintage. I bought it at an auction last month." Her eyes flicked down to the fabric, just for a second. Enough for me to know she understood. It wasn't from some thrift rack or borrowed from a rich friend. It was mine, and expensive. Someone handed me a glass of wine. I took it, sipped it, then wandered through the crowd like I had every right to be there. Because I did. That night was when everything shifted. They tried to act like it didn't bother them. That I belonged. That they'd always included me. "Oh, Holly, remember when you used to babysit the kids? My God, you were so good with them." That was Christina. I smiled. I still remember when Bella tried to flush her brother's Pokemon cards. She said he looked at her the wrong way. Laughter. Nervous. Forced. They didn't like that I remembered. That I saw them at their most chaotic. Their least curated. I had cleaned vomit off their hardwood floors. Heard fights through their thin bedroom walls. Watched as their perfect lives cracked in quiet corners. And now, I was one of them. No. Worse. I was above them. Alan Taylor, who never looked me in the eye when I was holding his toddler, suddenly found me fascinating. He cornered me near the bar, swirling his drink, trying to sound casual. "So, what do you do these days? Still? With the kids?" I smiled politely. "I own a company. Tech-based, mostly automation and data architecture. We just closed a Series B." He blinked. "Oh, that's big, right?" "It is." I didn't elaborate. Let him sit with that. Watching him try to pretend he understood was almost better than dessert. The truth was, most of them couldn't even pronounce what I did. But they pretended. Because now I was a curiosity, a problem, a threat. The men looked intrigued. The women looked nervous. Because women like me weren't supposed to win, not without marrying into it. Not without a scandal. Not without breaking. But I didn't break. I planned. And the dinner party was step one. After that night, I became something of a rumor. An urban legend in Louboutin heels. I started showing up in places they didn't expect me to be. High-end fundraisers, exclusive openings, private brunches that required both an invitation and a net worth they couldn't trace. And every time, I made sure they saw me. Never too loud, never too flashy, but always just enough to remind them that I was no longer just the babysitter. They started asking questions, whispering. Did she marry rich? No. I heard she started some company. I bet it's a front. Her uncle probably funded it. I heard she flipped properties on the side. Let them wonder. It was better than the truth. Because the truth was boring. I'd worked harder than they ever had. While they drank wine and posted fake candid Instagram shots, I coded algorithms and built contracts and negotiated partnerships over coffee and power naps. And when they were finally curious enough to try and bring me closer, I let them. Diana invited me to brunch. Just the two of us. I said yes. We met at a sleek little cafe where the waitstaff wore black aprons and the menu didn't have prices. She wore pearls and perfume. I wore silence and smiled like a knife. She tried to keep it casual. So, your company. Tell me more. I stirred my espresso. It's going well. We're expanding internationally. I'm spending a lot of time in Singapore lately. Her smile faltered for half a second. She recovered. That's wonderful. You know, I always knew you had potential. You were such a smart girl. So mature for your age. Mature, like a fruit about to rot. I tilted my head. You once told Greg I probably wouldn't finish college. That I didn't have the focus. She blinked. Hard, I never said that. You did. I was in the hallway, putting Jack to bed. He had a fever. You thought I couldn't hear you. She went pale. I sipped my coffee. She changed the subject. Well, we're thinking of selling the house. Market's insane right now. We want to upgrade. Maybe something with a third floor. Translation: they're drowning in debt. I nodded sympathetically. I know a few developers. I can recommend someone. But they're not cheap. Her lips twitched. I smiled. She was trying to gauge how much I knew, how dangerous I could be, how much power I actually had. And I gave her nothing. Because the less they knew, the more they feared. Later that week, I got another invite. This time, from the neighborhood committee. Apparently, they were looking to diversify the board. Add a young professional perspective. How progressive of them. I showed up late. Just late enough to be noticed. Wearing a tailored suit that screamed subtle dominance. They gave me a seat. They gave me a vote, and I used it. Quietly, smartly, surgically. Because I wasn't done yet. This wasn't about being seen anymore. This was about control. About reshaping the narrative. About showing them what it felt like to be dismissed, underestimated, and forgotten. Only to rise higher than they ever thought possible. And let me tell you something. I wasn't anywhere near finished. I never liked meetings. Especially not ones filled with clinking coffee mugs, half-formed ideas, and people who just like to hear themselves talk. But the neighborhood association? That was different. It wasn't a meeting. It was a stage. Every week they gathered in the clubhouse like a royal court of mediocrity. Diana in her pressed beige slacks. Greg, with his thin laptop and thinner patience. Christina, of course, couldn't attend without a venti something in hand and sunglasses like she was dodging paparazzi. And then there was me, newly voted in, quiet, observing, dangerous. At first, they treated me like a mascot. Let's ask Holly. She's young and techie. You're good at, spreadsheets, right? Maybe you can help us with our community page. You know, the internet-y stuff. I nodded. Smiled. Gave them exactly what they expected. Mild usefulness and zero threat. What they didn't see was that every spreadsheet they handed me gave me a little more power. Financial records, homeowner complaints, maintenance contracts, vendor invoices. Diana had no idea I was building a profile on everyone in that room, mapping out connections, finding pressure points, weaknesses, patterns. Christina hadn't paid her HOA dues in 3 months. Greg had pushed through a contractor bid for driveway paving that mysteriously went to his cousin's company. And Diana? She had been quietly editing. meeting minutes to erase dissenting votes. Sloppy ones. The kind you make when you've been in power too long and forget the rules still apply to you. I documented everything. Quietly. Lovingly. Because revenge isn't always about screaming. Sometimes it's about silence, about pulling the right thread and watching the whole sweater unravel in their hands. Meanwhile, I played my part. I showed up early, brought snacks, suggested young, fresh ideas like digital filing systems and voting by app. They praised me for being so modern, completely unaware I was building the structure that would later be used to expose them. It was almost too easy. And then the fundraiser happened. Diana's pride and joy. The annual spring gala. The social event of the season. She called me one afternoon, breathless. "Holly, darling, we need help." Of course they did. Turns out their event planner had dropped out last minute. Something about a scheduling conflict, though I later found out it involved an unpaid deposit and a nasty Yelp review. So now, Diana was panicking. "The whole committee is counting on me," she said. "It has to be perfect. Better than last year. We have the mayor coming." I pretended to hesitate. "Well, I could help, but I'm really swamped." I let the silence stretch. She bit. "I'll double your rate, whatever you charged before." Sweet, naive Diana. She still thought I was doing this for money. "I'm happy to help," I replied. "Just tell me what you need." She was so relieved. She didn't hear the shift in my tone. I took over immediately. Venue? I upgraded it, moved it to an art gallery downtown, one they couldn't have booked without me. I knew the owner. Catering? I hired a company that served actual food, not just shrimp cocktails in sad little cups. Invites? Went out to a very curated list. A few names they recognized, and quite a few they didn't. Investors, tech founders, real estate developers. People who wouldn't remember their names 5 minutes after shaking hands. Diana, naturally, was glowing. She thought she was hosting my contacts, believed they were here because of her. That night, I watched her float from guest to guest, giggling, like she was 25 and important again. She was so busy pretending she belonged that she didn't realize no one was looking at her. They were looking at me. People came up, shook my hand. "Holly, so glad you came. We loved your last feature in the magazine. Let's connect after this." Diana stood by, glass frozen midair, smiling through her teeth. Then came the real show. One of the guests, a sharply dressed woman named Marcy, approached me while I was speaking to the mayor. Marcy ran a regional publication, one that had just profiled women in tech and was scouting stories for a follow-up piece. She looked around. "So, this is the neighborhood you told me about?" I nodded. She leaned in. "It's perfect. You're perfect. Let's talk about a feature. Maybe a cover." Diana stepped forward, smiled. "I'm the head of the HOA. If you need community info..." Marcy interrupted. "Oh no, I'm here for Holly. She's the reason this is even on our radar." The silence after that? Exquisite. The party went on. Music played. People danced. Diana drank and drank. By the time the evening ended, she could barely stand. I offered to call her a car. She refused. She still needed to believe she had control. She didn't. Not anymore. Because what she didn't know was that I'd used the gala to finalize my final move. Not social status. Not appearances. Ownership. 2 weeks before, a small, worn-down property in the neighborhood had gone up for private sale. No one noticed. No one bid, except me. And I didn't just buy it. I bought it through a shell corporation, named it after my childhood dog. Just for fun. And now, sitting pretty in the middle of their precious community, was a house that belonged entirely to me. A symbol. A warning. A foothold. Next meeting, I casually brought it up. "Well," I said, sipping my water, "I'm officially a homeowner now. Technically, I can run for HOA president, right?" The room fell into silence. Greg cleared his throat. "Well, yes. I suppose technically, I'll think about it," I smiled. "No rush." They stared, because they knew. The babysitter was gone. The ghost of their past had become the architect of their downfall, and I was only getting started. I'd always known people like Diana were fragile. Not in the delicate, breakable sense. No, fragile like porcelain dolls. Stiff, hollow, cracked just beneath the glossy surface. And now I had a magnifying glass. It started with small things. A vote I swayed, a motion I accidentally tabled, an email I forwarded to the wrong person, who just happened to be the city's compliance officer. You'd be amazed at how fast the facade begins to slip when someone like Diana realizes she's not the one pulling strings anymore. She'd worked so hard to build her little empire on landscaping rules and noise complaints, and I was bulldozing through it with nothing but silence and a smile. The neighborhood started to notice, too, not all at once. But whispers grew like mold. People began calling me, asking for advice, inviting me to things Diana once considered her territory. Garden club teas, museum galas, golf tournaments I didn't even play in. The moment that truly broke her, though, was a simple photo. Someone had posted it to the community group. A candid shot from the gala. Me, laughing with the mayor, a hand on my shoulder, his other gesturing toward the crowd like I was the guest of honor. And there she was, blurred in the background, mouth half open, eyes caught mid-blink, insignificant. That image was her unraveling. She called me the next morning. "Holly," she said, voice tight. I saw the post. Lovely photo. I let the silence stretch. She broke first. I'm just a little surprised. "You seem to be getting quite involved. Rapidly." I smiled into the phone. "Well, I live here now. Just trying to contribute. You always said I was great with details." Her inhale was sharp. Then came the twist of the knife. "I was thinking of running for president again. Unless you're serious about it?" I let my voice drop half a tone. "Oh, I'm very serious." She didn't respond. Because she knew. That wasn't a question. It was a declaration. I ended the call with a cheerful, "See you at the next meeting." She didn't show up. For the first time in 8 years. People noticed. Greg tried to cover for her, mumbling something about a family emergency. But no one bought it. She was unraveling, and I wasn't even touching the threads anymore. Just watched. One night I went for a walk. Same streets I used to jog when I babysat Jack and Bella. Same cracked sidewalks. Same smell of overpriced jasmine candles wafting through open windows. But something had changed. Me. I wasn't the girl racing back before curfew. I was the woman whose presence made them draw their curtains. I passed Diana's house. Lights on in every room, curtains twitching. And then, there it was, her face, pale in the window, watching me like I was the ghost of every regret she never said aloud. I waved. She closed the curtain. The next day, I made it official. I submitted my candidacy for HOA president, attached a 3-page plan, streamlining operations, improving community access, increasing transparency. It was professional, polished, precise, and it terrified them. I knew because suddenly people who had never spoken to me, or only spoken down to me, began trying to chat. Greg asked me out for coffee. Said he always admired how driven I was. I declined. Christina invited me to her Pilates class. Said it would be fun to reconnect. I declined that too. Then came Diana's olive branch. A hand-delivered invitation. Tea at her house. Her signature in that flawless cursive she always used when writing passive-aggressive notes to her neighbors. I showed up, not to reconcile, but to watch her squirm. Her house was the same. Sterile, staged, cold. White walls, silver fixtures, furniture that screamed showroom, not home. She greeted me with a smile stretched so tight it looked painful. We sat in her sunroom, porcelain teacups, lemon wedges, everything curated. She danced around the subject for a while, mentioned her. Kids, the weather, some article she half read. Then finally, "I just worry you might be spreading yourself too thin." I tilted my head. "How so?" "Well, the board, the company, your obligations." There it was. The slip. She still saw me as the babysitter. Deep down, she still thought I belonged in the background. I set my cup down. I appreciate your concern, but I think I've proven I can handle myself. She nodded, hesitated, then said it. It's just, this community needs someone with a gentle touch. People trust me. I smiled. Slowly. Diana, the only thing people trust you to do is make the newsletters unbearably long and call code enforcement if someone leaves. A trash bin out overnight, her mouth fell open, and before she could recover, I stood. Thanks for the tea. I walked out without looking back. The vote came 2 weeks later, a community-wide election, every homeowner eligible. And when the results were posted, there was no announcement, no ceremony, just a single sheet taped to the clubhouse door. President, Holly Olson. It was over. No speech, no congratulations, no fanfare, just silence. Sweet, glorious silence. But inside that silence, power, and I intended to use every ounce of it. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about rebuilding the narrative from the inside out. And Diana, she wasn't even in the story anymore. The morning after the election, I took a slow drive through the neighborhood. Not to gloat. Not exactly. But let's just say the top was down. The engine purred like a satisfied cat, and the car, a custom, graphite gray Aston Martin Vantage, was loud enough to rattle Diana's perfectly symmetrical rose bushes. I didn't even need to stop. Her curtain twitched the second I rolled past. Symmetry. Poetic, really. She once said I was just the babysitter. Now I was the president, and she couldn't even complain, because she'd built the platform I was now standing on, every rule, every bylaw, every scrap of structure, all hers. I just followed the instructions better. The first board meeting I ran was memorable. We held it in the clubhouse, like always. But this time, I brought in a few upgrades. Digital sign-in.coffee, catered by the best cafe in town. Not the watery stuff Diana used to make in the back closet. And a surprise guest, a lawyer. Not mine, the HOA's. You all deserve to understand. Your rights, I told the members. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. Diana, who had dared to attend, stiffened like she'd swallowed a tack. Greg tried to interrupt. But we've never needed... I raised one hand. It's time we start. Protecting ourselves from misuse of authority, including retroactive audits of prior financial decisions. Silence. It was the first time I saw real fear in their eyes, because now I wasn't just playing their game. I was rewriting the rulebook. Later that night, after the meeting, Greg cornered me in the parking lot. You trying to start a witch hunt? I smiled. No, just a cleanup. He stormed off. Good. Let the panic settle in. My next move was simple. Visibility. I launched a new HOA website. Sleek, professional, mobile-friendly. Weekly updates. Transparent budgets. A report a concern tab with an actual response time. It drove the old guard crazy. Diana tried to discredit me by creating a newsletter of her own. Printed, folded, stapled by hand. It was a relic before it even hit the mailboxes. But the real blow came 3 weeks later. Got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Sophie. One of the moms I used to babysit for. She lived on the other side of the neighborhood, near the nature trails. She had been polite when I was a teenager, distant, but not cruel like Diana. She sounded nervous. Hi, Holly. I heard you're running the HOA now. I smiled. That's right. She hesitated. I wasn't sure if you'd remember me. You used to watch Lily when she was little. I remember, I said. And I did. Lily had once cried because she didn't want me to leave. Clung to my leg like I was the only sane person in her house. Sophie sighed. Well, I've got a situation. There's been some harassment. My neighbor, he's been recording us. Me and Lily. On his phone. I reported it, but Diana shut it down. Said there wasn't sufficient evidence. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. This wasn't just about gossip and status anymore. This was real. I'll handle it, I said. And I did, because now I had something Diana never had. Leverage. I accessed the complaint records. Found Sophie's submission, flagged, delayed, and marked closed with no explanation. Then I pulled up footage from the community camera at the park near her house. Guess who I saw? Her neighbor. Holding his phone at an angle that made my stomach twist. I compiled it all into a file, time-stamped, titled, Logged. Then I called the police. And the next day, that man was escorted out in handcuffs. The news spread like wildfire. The babysitter had just protected one of their own, and Diana, she'd buried it. The tide shifted fast after that. People who once whispered behind my back started speaking up. In public. Holly, that was impressive. We're lucky to have you. You're really changing things. It was intoxicating. But I never let it cloud my focus, because I still had one last thing to take care of. Diana. Not directly. That would be too easy. No, I wanted something quieter, something lasting. So I dug just a little deeper into those minutes she'd edited back when she was in power. Remember those? Turns out she'd blocked a community grant 2 years ago, one meant to build a learning center for kids near the community library. She claimed there were budget issues. But funny thing, the same month she blocked it, there was a landscape improvement invoice approved under her name. $10,000. To a company that no longer existed. At least, not on paper. I traced the transaction to a personal PayPal account. Guess whose email was attached? Oh, Diana, you really shouldn't have used your maiden name. It made the breadcrumb trail almost too easy. I gathered the documents, passed them to the HOA's legal advisor, and waited. It took a week, then 2, then 1. Crisp morning I got the call. Diana Adams has been served, charged with fraud. Pending further investigation. She was done. Publicly, professionally, permanently. She sold her house within the month. Quietly. No party, no farewell dinner. Just one moving truck and a very red face behind blackout sunglasses. I watched, from across the street as she climbed into the front seat of a battered sedan. No driver, no entourage. Just her and a mess she couldn't clean. Up. She didn't see me. But I waved anyway. Out of habit, out of principle, out of victory. Because when someone tells you you're just the babysitter, they never expect you to show up later with keys to their kingdom and receipts. But I did. And now? Now they call me president. It was almost disappointing how quickly Diana vanished. One day she was everywhere, barking about mailbox paint codes, handing out parking citations like Halloween candy. And the next, she was just gone. Her departure left a vacuum. And for a moment, the neighborhood held its breath, waiting to see if I would become the same tyrant she had been. I didn't, because I didn't need to control people to feel important. I already was. And that, in itself, unnerved them even more. I started small. The first change, I removed the HOA's anonymous complaint system. Oh, the uproar. You're silencing our voices, one woman shouted at the next meeting. No, I said calmly. I'm giving you the opportunity to say it to someone's face. The whisper network collapsed within a week. Suddenly, those brave keyboard warriors who once wrote vicious notes about porch lights and wind chimes couldn't even make eye contact at the grocery store. Liberating. Next, I proposed reallocating unused landscaping funds, the same ones Diana funneled into her fake improvement projects, toward a new initiative, a community scholarship fund. For the kids, Jack and Bella included. The irony didn't escape me. The same children I once babysat, fed goldfish crackers to, helped with spelling homework, now stood on the stage in front of the whole neighborhood as I handed them envelopes marked HOA scholarship recipient. Greg had the audacity to try and shake my hand after the ceremony. I smiled, nodded, then walked right past him. Let that handshake hang in the air like the ghost of his former dignity. The change wasn't just in policy. It was cultural. People started, leaving their porch lights on longer. Families gathered in the park again. We started hosting monthly community dinners, potluck style. Everyone brought something. I always brought wine. Good wine. People stopped calling me just Holly and started saying things like, "Ask Holly, she'll know." And I always did. But beneath the polished surface of my new role, the satisfaction of reform, and the slow humiliation of every person who once dismissed me. I kept one file, locked, encrypted, untouched. Diana S. file, because I wasn't stupid enough to think she was really gone. People like her don't go quietly. They retreat, lick their wounds, and wait. The first sign came 3 months after she moved. A new post appeared in a private Facebook group, a different neighborhood, a different HOA. But the writing was unmistakable, that same syrupy tone, that same obsession with maintaining standards. That same smile hidden beneath passive aggression. Diana had relocated, and she was trying to rise again. Pity. I forwarded the screenshots to the admin of the group, included the fraud investigation report. The publicly available one, of course. She was removed within an hour. No comment, no warning, just gone. They'd seen what I had. A woman who wore structure like armor but crumbled under scrutiny, and I'd made sure she'd never rebuild. Still, every once in a while, I'd get a call. A whisper. Someone she used to know. Someone she'd wronged. Apparently, the babysitter they once dismissed was now the person they turned to for advice. Funny how that works. Even Jack, now a teenager with the beginnings of a jawline and sarcasm to match, stopped me in the park one afternoon. "Hey," he said, tugging off his earbuds. "So, thanks for the scholarship." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think you remembered me," he shrugged. "I was a kid. I thought you were just the babysitter." "Everyone did," I said, half smiling. He kicked at a pebble. "You ever, want to teach people a lesson? For thinking that?" I looked him in the eye. "I already did." He laughed. "Cool." Then he jogged away, earbuds back in, hoodie flapping behind him. I stood there a minute, watching, thinking. The truth was, the revenge had already been served, cold, calculated, and thoroughly satisfying. But it wasn't about Diana anymore. Not really. It was about what I'd built out of her ashes, a neighborhood that actually functioned, a system that actually worked, and a reputation no one could reduce to a title. Still, I kept the car. That sleek, purring beast of a car that had turned heads and snapped necks when I pulled up in front of the clubhouse. Because while I didn't need to flaunt power to feel powerful, it didn't hurt to remind them. Especially when I parked it next to Greg's beat-up Tesla and saw his expression twist with that special mix of jealousy and regret. Perfection. And the license plate? It read, Nutsitter, just in case anyone forgot. You'd think after dismantling the suburban monarchy, I'd be done. But I wasn't. Because while Diana had been dethroned, her little disciples were still buzzing around like lost bees, waiting for their queen to return. Greg was one of them. Still slinking around meetings, trying to sneak in motions. Still pretending he wasn't complicit in the decade-long HOA reign of terror. Then there was Meredith. Remember her? The one who once said to my face, "You don't need to come inside. Holly, just wait in the foyer." Yeah, that Meredith. She'd started smiling too much lately. That fake, brittle kind of smile women wear when they've read one too many leadership books, but still can't look you in the eye. She even invited me to her birthday brunch. At her house. The same house I once sat outside for an hour while she got ready because she forgot I was coming to babysit. I went, of course, wore red. The kind of red that doesn't whisper confidence. It screams it. I walked into her kitchen like I owned it, complimented the wallpaper she copied from a Pinterest board I posted 2 years ago, and brought champagne so expensive Meredith's husband stared at the label like it was written in Greek. Her friends were polite. Overly so. "Oh, Holly, I heard you're doing things." "Yes, Karen, I'm doing things." "You mean saving this neighborhood from the suburban apocalypse you all sat through with passive approval?" "Yes, those things." But I smiled, bit my tongue. Played the game. Because I wasn't just the babysitter anymore. I was the queen now, and queens are always watching. That brunch was the moment it hit me. These people weren't just tolerating me. They were studying me, trying to figure out how I'd pulled it off, how the girl who once lugged a diaper bag and a tattered psychology textbook into their homes was now the most respected, and feared, woman on the street. Some tried to mimic me. Suddenly, red was the trend. Blazers replaced cardigans. Meredith even showed up to the next HOA event with a sleek laptop and matching designer tote, trying desperately to mirror the way I moved through meetings. I let her, because while imitation might be the sincerest form of flattery, it's also the clearest sign of surrender. But not everyone was content with surrender. Greg was getting bolder. He started showing up early to board meetings, whispering to newer residents, trying to sow seeds of doubt. She's spending too much. She's controlling everything. This isn't how things used to be. No, Greg, it's not. That's the point. So I called a special town hall. Open. Invitation. Public agenda? Topic? Past HOA failures and future accountability. Oh, the tension in the room when that slide popped up. Greg sat in the second row, arms crossed, jaw clenched. I started with a chart. Clean. Minimalist. It showed where HOA funds had gone over the last 10 years. Landscaping, 42%. Legal disputes, 17%. Community events, a meager 4%. Then I showed where those funds were going now. Events had jumped to 25%. Scholarships, 15%. Legal fees, practically vanished. And in bold letters, under current leadership, HOA dues were not increased, not once. There was a pause, the kind of silence you could rest a wine glass on. Then someone clapped, then two, then the whole room. Greg didn't move. I didn't need him to, because I wasn't speaking to Greg anymore. I was speaking to everyone who'd ever felt ignored, dismissed, pushed aside, not just by Diana, but by the entire system that made her possible. That night, I walked home through a neighborhood that felt different. Lighter. A few houses had porch lights shaped like little moons now, something I'd started, and others quietly copied. Kids were riding bikes again, playing in the cul-de-sacs like they did when I was 17 and still invisible. And, for the first time, I realized something. This was bigger than revenge. It was a rebuild, a resurrection, and I was the architect. Still, Greg didn't back down. 2 weeks later, I got an envelope in my mailbox, unmarked. Inside, photocopies of HOA meeting minutes from 5 years ago, the year I'd taken a leave of absence from college and started working full-time for a local nonprofit. He'd highlighted one section, an old vote denying a proposal from that very nonprofit. No explanation. No context, just the word conflict, scribbled in red. Oh, Greg, you thought you had me. You thought I'd be rattled. But you forgot one thing. I keep receipts, so I printed my own records. Emails, memos, tax forms. Every single item showing I wasn't employed by the nonprofit during the time in question. In fact, I'd submitted that proposal as a resident, long before I ever worked there. I stapled it all together. Added a note. Next time, fact check. Then I slipped it into his mailbox, with a peppermint, because petty should always be minty fresh. A week later, Greg submitted a formal resignation from the board, citing health stress. I wished him well, of course, publicly. Privately, I poured myself a glass of champagne and toasted to the power of documentation. From that point forward, no one challenged me again. Not seriously. Sure, Meredith still tried to get her book club approved as an official community enrichment group so she could request HOA funds for charcuterie boards. I declined, politely, firmly, then sent her a cheese knife set the next day, with a note for the next unofficial gathering. She didn't respond, but at the next potluck she brought a fruit tray shaped like my initials. That was enough. And me? I just kept doing what I did best. Watching. Fixing. Winning. Because this wasn't just about proving I wasn't just the babysitter. It was about reminding them that the babysitter sees everything. And if you're smart, you never cross the one person who knows exactly how you raised your children. I don't usually attend neighborhood dinners unless I'm hosting. But when I got the invitation from Greg's wife, yes, the Greg who tried to sabotage me with 2017 HOA records and retired in humiliation, I had to smile. Handwritten. Cream cardstock. Gold trim. You could tell she spent money on it, like a last-ditch attempt at social CPR. Inside, the words practically begged, We're hosting a small gathering of old friends and new leadership. Would be lovely to have you, Holly. Of course, it would, because now that Greg had burned every political bridge, he needed me to play nice for appearances. Rebrand him as a supportive civilian. They weren't inviting Holly the babysitter. They were summoning Holly the HOA queen, so I RSVP'd yes, and I didn't come alone. I brought Damien, a friend, a chef. Also, objectively attractive, tall, handsome. Effortless smile. Someone who made Greg shift uncomfortably when we stepped into their living room, and I casually said, "This is Damien. He runs 2 restaurants and 1 winery. We met at the city gala." A gala Greg was not invited to. Tragic. The room was filled with a few of the old guard, the passive-aggressive type that wears pearls and fake concern like armor. Meredith was there, of course, perched at the end of the table with her signature. "I'm better than you," but I read Brene Brown's smile. Greg poured wine like it was a job he used to be good at. "So, Holly," he said after the main course, leaning on the back of his chair like a man who still thought he had clout. "Still busy micromanaging garbage bins and newsletter fonts?" Laughter around the table. Forced, controlled. I smiled. "Oh, not really," I said, swirling my glass. "Now that everything's actually functional, I have time for more interesting projects. Like the City Council initiative. We're reviewing zoning permits for new developments. You know, real work." The silence hit like a dropped wine glass. Even Meredith blinked. Greg's smile twitched. "Well, that's impressive," his wife offered quickly. "We had no idea." "Most people don't," I said, sipping. "They assume I'm just the babysitter who stumbled into a gavel." And then I turned to Damien. "Speaking of which, you have to tell them the winery story." He launched into a story about a celebrity wine order gone wrong. The room laughed. Even Meredith cracked a smile, and, "Greg?" He just stared at his plate. Fork, knife, shame. But dinner wasn't the real event. The real moment came after dessert. Greg's wife brought out a framed photo, one of those group shots from the early days of the HOA. Back when Diana ruled and I was the invisible girl on the edge of the frame, half cut off. She set it on the table like a relic. "Can you believe how far we've come?" she said. "This neighborhood has changed so much." I leaned forward, tapped the glass over my blurred figure. "This girl right here," I said, "used to wait outside while Greg finished his phone calls. I wasn't allowed to knock until he texted." Greg cleared his throat. "That was years ago." "Yes," I said. "It was." Then I looked around the table. And yet, some people here still treat others like they don't belong unless they fit a box, a label, a pay grade. Silence. "And now?" I smiled. "Now the babysitter's the one setting policy, approving permits, hosting events." I paused. "Now I'm the one who gets to decide who belongs. Let them chew on that with their tiramisu." We left soon after. Damien and I walked to my car, his arm looped casually around mine. "You really enjoy this," he said, glancing at me sideways. "What?" I asked. "The long game. The slow burn." I opened the driver's door. "I enjoy clarity," he chuckled. "Remind me not to cross you." "Smart man," I said, starting the engine. The next day, photos from the dinner appeared on the neighborhood Facebook page. But guess who was mysteriously cropped out of all of them? Damien. It was almost cute, an attempt to make it look like I came alone, as if removing a man from a picture could erase the fact that I held every ounce of power in that room. So I posted my own photo. Just one. Me and Damien. Standing outside the house, my arm on his chest, his arm on my waist, captioned simply, "Lovely dinner, great company. Thanks for hosting, Greg." Within minutes, it had more likes than any HOA announcement in history. The comments poured in. "OMG, you two are adorable. When's the wedding?" Greg looks like he's holding back tears in the background. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. The community was doing it for me. I'd become something new. Not just the babysitter, not just the HOA queen, but a story, a myth, a lesson. You don't dismiss people because of where they are in your house. Because one day, they might own the block and have the guest list to prove it. Later that week, Meredith stopped me outside the clubhouse. I heard you're speaking at the city event next month, she said. I nodded. They asked me to present the Neighborhood Leadership Award. Her smile flickered. That used to go to Diana. I smiled wider. And look how that turned out. She laughed. Hollow. Then leaned closer. You're not planning to, I don't know, expose people again at the ceremony, are you? I tilted my head. Why, Meredith? Something you're worried I'll expose? She flushed. I didn't wait for an answer. Just walked away. Heels clicking against the concrete like punctuation marks. Because when you control the narrative, the only sound louder than your footsteps is the silence you leave behind. The city. Council buildings smelled like polished wood and inflated egos. There were banners hung across the front lobby. Gold lettering, blue accents. Someone even had the nerve to call it an evening of integrity. Oh, the irony. Because half the people being honored were the same ones who once looked at me like I belonged on the welcome mat, not behind a podium. But here I was, not in the audience, on the program. Slated as the final speaker, the closing act. I wore a sleek black suit, hair pinned, heels sharp enough to slice glass. No one could pretend I didn't belong this time. Not even Meredith, who clutched her speech like it was a lifeline. She was presenting the Neighborhood Leadership Award. You know, the one that used to go to Diana every year. Back when Diana's leadership consisted of passive-aggressively banning trampoline colors and measuring grass height with a ruler. Tonight, though, the name on the plaque wasn't Diana's. It was mine. As Meredith stood at the microphone, her voice wavered just slightly. Holly Olson has been a transformative force in our community. She, reshaped how we define neighborhood involvement. She has empowered residents, streamlined governance, and brought a refreshing level of transparency. Translation? She made it harder for people like me to lie, cheat, and manipulate power unchecked. She handed me the plaque with a strained smile, like it physically pained her to do it. I took it with both hands, held it up, paused for applause. Then I stepped to the mic. Thank you, Meredith, I said, flashing her a smile so practiced it belonged in a museum. The audience chuckled politely. Meredith took a step back. Smart move. I looked around the room. Familiar faces everywhere. Some beaming, others uncomfortable. I knew which was which. Tonight's theme is integrity, I said. A beautiful word. Powerful. And yet, one we often mistake for politeness or compliance. I paused. Let that sink in. But real integrity isn't silent. It's not about keeping things the way they are just because it's easier. Real integrity challenges comfort, disrupts tradition, makes people nervous. People shifted in their seats. Good, I continued. I started as the girl no one saw, the sitter, the help. I was allowed to exist as long as I didn't speak too loudly, take up too much space, or forget my place. Eyes lowered. Meredith stiffened. But here's the thing about people you overlook. We watch. We listen. We remember. Now they were really listening. Eventually, you realize the ones you dismissed were the only ones paying attention. And when they rise, they do it with eyes wide open and receipts in hand. There were a few nervous laughs. One man, actually, dropped his phone. I smiled. Leadership isn't about having power. It's about knowing what to do with it when it's finally in your hands. And I chose to use mine cleaning up the messes that were left behind. Messes no one wanted to talk about. Meredith was frozen in place, like she knew what was coming. And tonight, I said, voice steady, I'd like to honor someone else. Gasps. This wasn't on the program. I gestured toward the back of the room. An assistant wheeled in a whiteboard. Behind it, a chart, a timeline, and a stack of files. I walked to it. Before I ever joined the HOA, before I ever sat in a leadership meeting, I submitted a community development proposal. It was declined. I tapped the file 5 times, with no explanation. Then I pointed to a highlighted section of an old internal memo. This document, which I obtained through a formal request, shows that the proposal was labeled a non-priority due to its source. The source was me, the babysitter, the help, the girl not worth listening to. I looked at Meredith, then at the rest of the room. "This is what integrity looks like," I said. "It looks like facing the truth, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient." Applause started, slowly, then grew. I turned back to the mic. "So yes, I accept this award, but I also issue a challenge to every person in this room who ever sat in silence while someone else was dismissed, devalued, or ignored." I lifted the plaque. "Let this be more than metal and wood. Let it be a reminder." Then I stepped off the stage and left Meredith to wilt in her pantyhose. Later that night, I sat on the hood of my car in the parking lot. Damien joined me, holding 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. "Did you just deliver the most polite public takedown in city history?" he asked, handing me one. I sipped. "I prefer the term elevated accountability." He laughed. "You know they're going to talk about this for years, right?" "Good," I said. "Let them." I looked out over the skyline. All the homes, offices, lives I used to view from the ground. Now I was above them, not out of spite, but because I climbed. Every insult, every dismissal, every eye roll and backhanded compliment. I used them like rungs on a ladder. People thought I was just the babysitter, but babysitters don't forget. We see the mess behind the doors, guests never open. We know who eats cookies at midnight and lies about brushing their teeth. And one day, if you're lucky, the babysitter becomes the one holding the keys to everything. A few weeks after the ceremony, I got a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real letter. Cream envelope, embossed seal. Return address? Meredith Andrews. I laughed before. I even opened it. Inside, a card, a handwritten note, and a formal invitation. Apparently, she and her husband were listing their house. Yes, that house. The one with the oversized fountain and the underwhelming reputation. They were moving. Downsizing, she said. Closer to family. But I knew better. She was running. She wanted one last soiree to say goodbye. A gathering of friends, supporters, and community leaders. And she wanted me there. Oh, honey. Of course I'd come. But not as a guest. I had other plans. Over the last few months, while Meredith was still clinging to the last scraps of her power, I'd been quietly working behind the scenes, not out of vengeance, out of vision. You see, the city council and I had been collaborating on a revitalization initiative, one that would transform outdated homes and plots into eco-friendly, sustainable community projects. And Meredith's block? Prime real estate. The kind of location investors drooled over. I made sure her property was on the radar. I'd waited patiently. Didn't want her house. I wanted the whole street. So when she invited me to her farewell gathering, I showed up. Clipboard in hand, proposal folder tucked under my arm, and a city representative at my side. Meredith greeted me at the door like nothing had changed. She wore pastel silk and desperation. "Darling, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, reaching for a hug she didn't mean. I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. Inside, the house was dressed like it was begging for approval. Soft jazz, expensive candles, wine that tasted like regret. She led me through a crowd of realtors, acquaintances, and people who still thought I sold homemade granola bars at the farmer's market. I leaned in. "Have you had any offers yet?" She stiffened. "A few, but nothing concrete." I nodded. "Interesting, because I actually have a group that's very interested in this block. We're reviewing potential redevelopment zones, and this street scored quite high on the livability index." Her face froze. "Oh, don't worry," I said lightly. "It's nothing personal, just business. You know how it is." I left her to chew on that. Then I made my way to the kitchen, where I knew people gossiped more freely. It didn't take long before word spread that I was working with a city-backed initiative and evaluating property values for future acquisition. Suddenly, the tone of the party shifted. People started asking me questions. Friendly, curious, a little too eager. One couple practically shoved their contact info into my hand before dessert. And Meredith? She was sinking faster than her overpriced souffle. By the end of the night, she cornered me on the patio. "What exactly are you doing, Holly?" I turned slowly. "What do you mean?" "You're scaring off my buyers." "Am I?" I asked, tilting my head. "Or are you just realizing your house isn't the prize you thought it was?" She narrowed her eyes. "You planned this." "Planned what?" I said, faux innocence dripping from every word. "To attend a goodbye party that you invited me to?" "You think this is funny?" I stepped closer, voice low. "I think it's poetic. You humiliated me." "No, Meredith," I said with a smile. "You did that to yourself when you decided I was just the babysitter." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Just silence. A soft, trembling silence. I let her sit in it. Then I turned and walked back inside. A month later, the sale went through. Not to a family, not to another desperate socialite, but to a development group I recommended, one focused on sustainable housing, green spaces, and local community hubs. Meredith's house? Scheduled for demolition next spring. The new plan includes a public library, a playground, and a community co-op. Oh, and the main street running through it will be named Olson Way. Fitting, don't you think? I drive by sometimes, just to watch. The fence go up, the signs go out. There's something satisfying about transformation, about seeing something arrogant and stagnant turn into something useful, beautiful, alive. Some of the old guards still glare at me in town halls and online forums. But most, they nod now. Some even smile. They've learned the truth. I wasn't the help. I was the future. And now, the girl they used to dismiss controls the neighborhood they thought they owned. I pulled up to the groundbreaking ceremony in the same car they all mocked me for, the one they said I must have rented. Only this time, the mayor was waiting for me. Camera crews, press, residents. They clapped when I stepped out. They cheered when I cut the ribbon. Somewhere, Meredith was probably watching. It unfolded from her downsized condo, choking on a low-sodium cracker. And Greg, still unemployed, still bitter, still blocked. As the cameras flashed and the ribbon fluttered to the ground, I felt something click into place. Closure. Not just for me. For every person who's ever been talked down to, laughed at, underestimated. For every woman told to stay quiet, smile, and be grateful for scraps. This was for them, for us, because we don't stay invisible forever. We rise, and when we do, we don't just take a seat at the table, we build a new one. And everyone who once laughed has to ask for a place at ours.